Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's On the Spot. I'm Zach Strickland here with our recluse, JP Hampstead.
Yes, I've reemerged from my domicile for the first time in a week. Once again, the lights are too bright, sounds are too loud, people's faces look strange. Chattanooga's a ghost town. Other than that, I'm doing fine.
Yeah,
How are you?
No, it's been great. I've been coming into the post-apocalyptic Chattanooga office here for the last several days, several weeks, keeping the fort down. But, something that we've continued to see in the freight market is these declining volumes.
Right.
We're seeing volumes really fall off a cliff, about 8% down week over week. And then we're down, to 6.82% on the tender rejection index, which again, we were at about 12 to 13% this time last week. So capacity's loosening, volumes are dropping significantly. What are you hearing out in the world, man?
Reefer volumes are also dropping rapidly, although that's more defensive and it sort of had a higher peak and may reset, positive year on year without going negative. Remember that on a year-over-year basis, reefer volumes peaked at 85% up year over year,
which was late March, correct?
Right, and now they're down to about 17% up year over year.
And we're still in early April, so that retraction has been pretty fast, even though we're still up year over year.
And we still, produce season is still a thing. Demand for beverages and hydration is still going to spike. When you think about cities like Phoenix, Dallas, Houston, Atlanta, Miami that start getting hot this time of year, you start seeing those average daily temps get into the 80s.
Well, Florida has been abnormally hot the past month or so. We already had the strawberry harvest down there.
Yep.
But there's it's been extremely hot, but also extremely dry in Florida. So produce season down there starts really going here in this next month or so.
Yeah, so that will prop up some kinds of food and beverage volumes and refrigerated freight. But the problem is that the carriers that haul that are not going to be able to enjoy the rate spikes that they probably would have in prior years, simply because capacity is going to be abundant in all modes. People are going to be competing for freight. We think that sort of a general loose capacity environment is going to mute. There'll still be sort of like a local and temporary volatility around things like harvests and different things like that. But the general availability of refrigerated equipment should kind of tamp down any craziness in the rates.
Now let's talk about this for a minute. So traditionally we have the rate spike for produce season in isolated areas of the country, California, Florida, along the border there, Mexico, at different times of the year. And what we normally see is a pretty significant jump in rates, spot rates specifically. A lot of this freight moves on the spot market, not a lot of it's contracted because of the seasonality factor of it. So generally those rates are dependent on the general conditions of the market, however. So if the market itself is loose, that should flatten the curve, if you will, of the
in a tight market that's
spike.
Already sensitive. Any kind of incremental volume tick up is going to have an outsized effect on rates.
Right.
But the reverse is true in a very loose market. It's you're like pushing a string in some way. It's so loose that the market can absorb the volume that's happening.
Yeah, it's going to basically have increased sensitivity to it when things are tight, and then it's going to also pull it down a little bit more significantly when things are loose. Now, something that I'm not clear of and not sure about is, with volumes dropping on all this non-food and beverage commodity, we haven't really seen this type of environment before where we see such a disproportionate amount of freight within a certain niche. You know what I'm saying? So as people are, generally food and beverage goes into consumer-centric cities. They go into Atlanta's, the megalopolis, Chicago, Boston.
Wherever people are.
Where all the people live. The problem is that all the production centers out of those markets are now shut down. Do you think that there's going to be any, kind of correction from that? Do you think that capacity may actually tighten a little bit because of this?
Yeah, we've been talking about, that is an interesting theory, is that tender rejections will not retest the lows we saw in 2019 simply because the lopsidedness of the available freight is preventing carriers from really operating in a network,
right,
or efficiently allocating capacity to where it needs to be when it needs to be there. And so, the kind of the sort of unusual and unprecedented and artificial lumpiness of the freight mixture that's available, could keep rejections higher. It's hard to say.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the answer to the question, but it's something that I've been toying around with and really watching for. As we're watching these.
Certainly for months, I've heard anecdotes of both asset-based carriers and non-asset 3PLs bidding aggressively, and by that I mean lowering contracted rates in order to secure volumes in anticipation of this. We've also seen private fleets doing some work to reallocate capacity from customers that may be shut down to, for example, the grocery business that needed a lot of help a few weeks ago. So, they are trying to, do their job and match capacity to freight. I just don't know, on a large scale whether, tender rejections stay above 5% or not.
Yeah.
It looks like, they're going down rapidly.
They're going down extremely fast, 6.3% about now. And that's, again, about 600 basis points off of last week.
Right.
Right now, so it looks like they will probably progress through that 5% barrier, at least for a period of time. Now, what I think might be an interesting topic to discuss here in the future, I know a lot of the carriers have discussed very defensive positions. A lot of brokers have, really tried to press those rates down as well on the carrier side, knowing that volumes are going to slide throughout the month and probably for the near future. And, where that bottom is, I don't know. Me and Craig Fuller.
No one knows. If you look at, one thing to just look at would be investment banks' GDP forecasts, which are all over the place.
Yeah, they don't know either. And so, Craig and I were discussing this the other day. He thinks the bottom of the OTVI will be somewhere around 7,500. Again, this is all dependent on how long we're shut down. I think that, we'll start to reopen things by mid to late May, which I think puts us at potentially seeing OTVI values as low as 7,000, which would be 30% lower than a March 2018 level, which
is disastrous.
Or 30% lower than we saw in early March of this year. It's not great, but again, I don't know these things.
No, it's not. It's more than not great.
Yeah,
it's disastrous.
Yeah. So that being said, again, these networks that carriers are dependent on, you have a lot of these small carriers that don't have the disparity of shippers that a larger carrier does. So they have less diversity in their portfolio of freight that they're shipping. They're going into a market that they used to have 10 loads a day coming out of. Now there's only one. How do they get back to where they were coming from? Again, these are going to be very, they're going to have like 5 or 6 lanes.
They take whatever they can get. Do they end up in a different destination?
And they end up bouncing around. So I think that over time we're going to see capacity really take a big hit here. And I think as a former pricing guy, I would be trying to get as much, rate out of the market as it could bear, with the argument saying, hey, shipper, do you want me to be in business? To be able to handle your freight here in the next several months. Because if we're talking, significant drops in volume, my network's out of balance, you don't have as much freight you're shipping, but neither does anybody else. There is an argument to be had for saying, I'm going to have to travel 50% further for each delivery.
Yeah.
On non-revenue side, carriers cannot operate that way. Again, you're talking about carriers that are operating in the 90s on a good year. Now they're going to have to consider,
right.
So you're going to take rate decreases and you're also going to operate less efficiently. At some point, there's going to have to be a healthy balance. We're watching, carriers, the oceanic carriers, they're taking rate increases because they're managing capacity on their own. They're obviously in an alliance. What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, honestly, we're still seeing a lot of voided sailings now, from Europe to the East Coast as well as on the Trans-Pacific. So I think yesterday there was a big batch of voided sailings for the next 5 weeks coming from coming from ports like Rotterdam and Antwerp and pretty much all the ports in Europe to places like New York, Savannah, Charleston. So, that's starting to hit. I don't know when Europe turns back on. It seems like they're a little bit further ahead of us than we are, maybe by a couple weeks.
Right.
But what's the thing that I'm, and we also see avoided sailings, I should say, from places like the Indian subcontinent to the Middle East, or Asia to the Middle East, Asia to the Indian subcontinent. I just don't know where all that capacity is going.
I think they're just docked.
You just think the ships are just like,
they're just docked. We can actually see that in sonar. We can see these ships literally just parked around Singapore. A lot of them were trying to use this time to retrofit for the scrubbers
and stuff.
At least in the early phases of this.
Before the manufacturing facilities of the scrubbers got shut down.
And now that we're seeing this demand side contraction on our end, as the United States and other countries are shutting down, and we're seeing cancellations of orders and stuff like that from the retail side throughout the summer. We have seen some import volumes go up a little bit, but I do find it fascinating that these maritime carriers control their capacity, and I think that's something that, obviously there's less of them, and they have alliances, that can control those rates a lot better than the domestic trucking market. But I do think that the strategy is sound in the way that, hey, if we don't want to have this 2009 type disastrous year where we're going to have to limit a lot of ongoing capacity. Again, this is actually, beneficial to shippers in the future if they don't just drop their transportation spend all the way to the floor. I mean, I know they don't think about it in that term.
They're worried about their own revenues
and that makes total sense. But in the long term, if we do see a significant capacity contraction on the domestic carrier side,
it's going to hurt the carriers.
And then eventually,
the shippers,
it's going to hurt the shippers here in a year when, say that the volumes start to pick back up. And again, we don't know what it looks like. I personally think it'll be a pretty slow crawl back up. What do you think about that?
No, that's our working thesis. Just because, with so many different players in the supply chain and with how collaborative moving goods has to be and is, we just think that it's not going to be like, everyone shows back up to work at 8 a.m. on Monday and turns everything back on, and it just starts flowing at 100% capacity. Like suppliers, producers, transportation companies, warehouse operators, all of those sort of people are going to be shut down and then come back online to varying degrees at varying timelines.
Right.
So it's going to be slow, and the supply chain is going to kind of move at the speed of the weakest link.
Yeah, and we've heard no real plan or strategic plan around, allowing people to come back online. Obviously a lot of people are working from home right now, but the people that manufacture the goods, that work out in the world, that actually produce the stuff that goes on trucks, they're largely at home, furloughed, laid off, et cetera. Another 6.6 million people unemployed this week. So it's not going to, you just can't simply flip the switch and turn that back on with any significance.
No, there were some interesting data coming out of Wuhan recently. Some anecdotes I saw reported in Bloomberg, basically saying that new car sales in Wuhan are back up to pre-virus levels, suggesting that consumers have jumped back into spending and are trying to do their part to prop up the economy. So take that with a grain of salt. It's Chinese data, so it's
Are you saying that you don't trust the Chinese data?
Yeah, I mean, all it really tells you is sort of like the narrative that, I mean, these were American reporters talking to car dealerships. It wasn't like, this wasn't filtered through, a government report.
Right.
But still, I mean, I think if that's true, or to the extent it's true, it implies that there will be pent-up demand from everyone staying at home, not being able to do the things they want to do, and people may spend operationally on the supply chain side, getting back to work and making things move efficiently is a whole nother kettle of fish.
Right. Well, I guess we're still shut down for the time being. We still don't have a definitive plan in place just yet, so it'll probably be at least a few more weeks before things get back going here.
I expect next week will be more the same.
Well, thanks as always, JP, for joining me this week, and stay tuned to FreightWaves.com or FreightWaves TV for additional insights on what's happening in the freight market. Have a good weekend.